There's no going
So you
back.
can do what you wanna do. You can do what you wanna do.
Hello artists, it's Dalene FM here again, and welcome to day 19 of 365 of the Epic Journey. What we're going to be doing today is we're going to have a look at how we can use the grid aspect ratio that we were discussing yesterday in a life drawing. Now it might seem a little bit strange to you, how do you put a grid onto real life? Now it's nice to know how to use a grid method when you're painting from life, particularly when you're sitting outdoors and you're doing plein air painting, for example, or if you're doing you've got a model, a live model that's standing in front of you, and you need to be able to grid her up or him up to get your proportions right. So the grid method is a really nice way to start learning proportions. Now, like I said in the video yesterday, the ultimate aim is to get to a point where you don't need a grid anymore. So this is something that will be employed particularly by younger artists or artists that are still learning, but keeping in mind all the time that you eventually want to get to a point where you don't need your grid method anymore. I came across this particular method of using a grid method with life drawing when I was studying the old masters. Now I figure if the old masters can do it, then so can we. So that's where I got the idea from. This is not new to me, I didn't invent this, but it's not something that we see every day. Now what I've done is I've taken an old unused canvas. It was actually a canvas that I did a really terrible painting on, and I just cut the canvas off, and this is the frame that's left behind. And I've measured across the short side and the long side, and I've divided each side by 8 squares. It doesn't really matter how many squares you use, whatever you feel most comfortable, but this was quite small, so I thought it was no more than 8 should be fine. I then just hammered little panel pins in at those little intervals, and then I strung string through it like a tennis racket. Simple as that. I then worked out, you'll see up here, I've got 1.42. Now that's my aspect ratio. So every time I use this grid, whether I'm using it that way or that way, my aspect ratio is 1.42. Now I can hear you asking, how do you use this grid? Well, it's actually really simple. There's one little thing that you have to remember, and that's how your eye sees it. But for the moment, we're going to put little bulldog clips on either side of it. Now behind me I have got set up a simulated still life. Pretend that what you're seeing in front of you there is, I don't know, pretty still life, flowers maybe, that sort of thing. And then we're going to stand this up. Now I'm going to have to lower the camera so that you can actually see this at the correct level. So if you'll just give me a minute, I'll lower the camera. So what you're seeing here is my grid standing on the table. The camera's lowered down so it's at eye level with it, and there at the back is the composition, and you can see that the composition's a little bit high, so I could either lift the grid up, I could turn it on its side that way maybe, I could do as I please. I could move it further or closer until I'm happy with the way that it looks in the frame. Now one thing that you've got to be really careful of is when you're looking through this grid and you move your head around, your lines relative to your composition in the background is going to move because of the way that you're moving your head. So there's 2 ways that you can overcome that. First and foremost is you can pick a spot. For example, maybe the top of my cone there. I can place the top of my cone onto one of the crosses, where the string lines cross, and every time I look back at it, I can just make sure that my head is in the right place and that I put that point of that cone back onto that particular spot, and then I carry on drawing. The other thing that I can do is and this is how the old masters used to solve it back in the day, is they would have an adjustable arm that came off this and hung down to the middle and had a little peephole in front of it, so they would put the eye to the peephole, and that would keep their head steady. So it's a little bit difficult to make it with a peephole, so I'm not going to do that. But it's easy enough just to find a spot. Let's say you're doing a bunch of flowers. You could place one of the crosshairs slap bang in the middle of one of your bunches of flowers, for example, and then every time you look back at it, you make sure that that particular little crosshair is in that particular spot, and that'll keep your head nice and steady. The other thing that you need to remember as well is you need to take into account whether or not you're looking down or looking up at what you're drawing. Now, if you're looking down at what you're drawing, then you've got to make sure that your frame slightly tilts forward. And the reason for that is that your frame needs to be at 90 degrees to your line of sight. and that is to avoid distortion. So when you're sitting with a still life and you've got a table to mount it on, it's not a problem. But what happens if you're outdoors or if you're working with a live model? Well, it's quite easy to overcome. You just need to get one of those little tripods with adjustable legs and an adjustable arm at the top, and you'd place your frame on the top of those little tripods, and you can tilt it on that frame, and you can lower the legs up and down until you get it exactly where you want it, and then you sit back and you look absolutely dead still through your frame, and you effectively using your string as if it was a grid on a photograph. Well, artists, I hope that helps you. If you've ever been battling with proportions to try and get your life drawing proportions correct, then this is a little trick that you can use. And if you make yourself a frame and string some string around it and do some drawings, and please scan them in or take photographs of them and send them to me. I'd love to see what you're doing. If you've enjoyed this video, if you've learned something from it, I ask you please to like and share and subscribe and all the rest of the social media stuff. And I will see you tomorrow in day 20. Thank you so much for joining me. Goodbye.
That's what you want to do.